So we're doing something a bit different today, as what we're doing is taking a look at an incredibly ambitious mod for Cyberpunk that you can download right now, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend you to, as this is heavily work in progress, but at the same time, it does a pretty good job at addressing most of the big complaints around the game. And what I'm talking about here is Cybermod, which is really more of a framework than a mod itself. It's a tool that can be used to basically create other mods and other experiences in a Cyberpunk. I mean, even the way you experience this is pretty interesting. It has a unique installation process, but then as you get in game, you go on your apartment computer to actually download some of the other modules that you can get from this one. And some of the things this adds in are pretty interesting, like the AV of Night City is one module. I would describe this as a pretty interesting proof of concept more so than anything else, as what this will do is place a totally new vendor in Night City where you can purchase an AV, your own flyable craft that you'll be able to use and fly around with, just like the rest of the elite of Night City. From there, you can call it in like a regular vehicle, and sometimes it will spawn partially in the ground, but that's okay. And using the interact menu from the mod, you can get inside, take a look at all the pretty things and the door closing, and then you could switch over to third person and actually start cruising around Night City in your very own AV. It's rather fast, there's definitely some serious motors on this thing, but also fairly maneuverable, and you could cruise around and have this very unique perspective. And you'd even try and fly among some of the other AVs if you want that hyper immersive experience. And there's even some partial implementation of having a Delamain AV come and pick you up as a taxi. It'll land, pick you up, and then place you down. So it's technically functional, but pretty rough around the edges, at least right now. It's not like a polished version of having a working AV, but there's a lot of the major parts here. There's a stock market impacted by in-game events that allows you to buy shares in some of the various corporations in the Cyberpunk world, and things will go up and down so you can make or lose money. Although one of the most practical features and fundamental implementations of this mod that is by far the most interesting is gang wars. And I can see this being the reason a lot of you end up downloading this one, but also like, hey, don't get hacked. The streets of Cyberpunk 2077 are an incredibly sketchy place, but sometimes the internet itself can also be an incredibly sketchy place. But thankfully, I'm here to help you, because for just literally $1.39 per month, you can get today's video sponsor with Atlas VPN right now and get protected. Atlas VPN has all of the traditional features of great VPNs, like unlocking access to a ton of additional shows with your existing Netflix subscription, but it also has this pretty amazing data breach monitor that will scan new and old leaked databases, so you will proactively find out when your information gets leaked and you can take action immediately. And for just a little over $1 per month, future you will definitely thank you for this one. But looking back at Gang Wars, what it's going to do is basically increase gang spawns all around Night City. And more specifically, at times, gang wars will break out, most common in the evening and in my testing in the worst parts of town, but you'll basically just all of a sudden hear a ton of gunfire around you and a ton of members of two competing factions going at it. And you'll definitely notice these because it tends to have a larger quantity of spawns, more members of those two factions fighting than you would typically find in Night City in general. You can jump in and help out one side or another, and you will notice you're standing with those groups, which is also an added feature. It'll increase or decrease based on your actions. There's also a mission segment you could do with some of these. And these are just awesome to stumble upon, accidentally get pulled into and involved in. They are hand-placed spawns, so there's going to be set locations in Night City. I didn't find them to be overbearing. I actually spent a lot of time driving around looking for these. But if you're just naturally playing the game, not trying to specifically film this feature, it's going to be really cool to just be doing a mission or going from point A to point B in your car and just be like, oh, whoa, you turned a corner and you're finding an all-out war like would probably be happening in Night City, or even is reportedly happening based on the lore with the game. And even further, some of these guys may chase you. Sometimes you could actually have certain gang members chasing you down if your reputation with them falls too low. With this mod, you could also buy a trauma team membership for yourself. You could have them save you. You first have to go to their HQ to actually buy the plan, but then after falling under 120 HP, they will rescue you. This involves an AV seamlessly swooping in and transporting you to the closest med center, where you'll basically just be reset and gain your health back. If you're inside, which is pretty rare, they'll actually just send up some backup trauma team members. This does have some purchasable apartments and properties. It seems like the early implementation of buying apartments and other locations, you go to certain places, purchase them for a certain amount of eddies, as well as convert some of these to a business. And there's even some mechanics to place down certain objects on display in some of these places, depending on what you have in your inventory, which seems like an idea and a feature with a lot of potential. And the mod author has even been sharing more of what he has planned in the future. He's posted some work in progress videos on his Discord, like MaxTac swooping in and engaging in combat with the rest of the combatants in Night City. This looks epic, like exactly what you have early on in the game when you're with Jackie, what we've seen in some of the gameplay trailers. Imagine stumbling upon a gang war and then even having MaxTac swoop in also. That would be pretty amazing, a pretty memorable experience in this beautiful open world. And even a roadblock system where an enemy faction will set up a roadblock and it'll actually prompt you before you can pass them. And then you'll have different outcomes depending on seemingly what you choose here. So overall, this mod is super interesting, extremely experimental, basically something you shouldn't download on your existing and real playthrough because it could end up corrupting your save. The mod author even warns about this. And there's even a bunch of other modules I'm not talking about, either because I couldn't actually get them working or for a lack of time, but what is being done here is basically attempting to address many of the big complaints people have around Cyberpunk. And I want to showcase this to you because it's super interesting and it definitely has a lot of potential, and I'm curious to see where this goes next, as they even have some talks and plans to implement multiplayer, which is somewhat in an incredibly buggy high-level state, but more on that in the future. With that said, I didn't want to just leave you with a mod that you don't even actually download. So a few more practical ones. One of the more recent releases is better loot markers, which is a great new feature. What it'll do is actually replace the typical colored loot markers with an icon that actually shows what the loot is. So if it's a weapon, you'll be able to see it's a weapon, and also the color of the marker determines if it's rare, epic, etc. Super nice quality of life one, and honestly makes looting and running around with a bunch of bodies around you, which oftentimes happens in Cyberpunk, way nicer. I wouldn't be shocked if CDPR does this themselves if they're paying attention to the mod scene, because this is a really handy one, a huge quality of life improvement. Another huge quality of life improvement for some of you is disable reveal position hack. What this will do is remove that reveal position that would kick in if you're stealthily quick hacking from afar. Basically, if you're quick hacking and there's a net runner, they can detect your position. Typically, after you use a couple of hacks, this can be super frustrating if you're trying to go full stealth, because eventually the enemies will discover where you are. This will just remove that from the game. So as you can see in the background, I can endlessly quick hack enemies without me ever getting my position revealed. But then for a final mod duo that is completely functional and some people will love, but not everyone will be able to use either, we do have high distant 2D cars, as well as improved traffic, NPCs, draw distance, and density. Technically two separate mods, but if you use one, you should probably use both of them. High distant 2D cars is going to remove those super ugly 2D car sprites that you could oftentimes see in the distance. You don't even have to look that far in the distance. You see these pretty often. They just disappear into nothingness. Now they're just gone. Nothing will spawn. And improved traffic, NPCs, draw distance, and density will make it so there is not only a bit more density to traffic if you choose that file, but also the distance by which you'll be able to see actual cars will be much further. So you can see here, as I'm on this highway intersection and I'm looking down onto the ground, I can see those cars driving really far away. Typically in Cyberpunk, those would be 2D sprites or nothing. But not only did I remove 2D sprites, but I have a farther draw distance, and hence I could actually see those cars from very, very far away. The problem being, this comes to a fairly large hit on performance at points. There is just more going on. You are loading more for this game. So if you are already barely getting 60 FPS, this will almost certainly tank your FPS at some intersections. But still is a pretty cool one. If you want that peak Cyberpunk experience, that mod combo does yield some pretty cool results. Honestly, way better than what's there by default. But that said, let's look at some of the more recent mods to come out for this game, some experimental stuff to keep an eye on in the future, and some stuff you could download right now. Hopefully you guys found this one informative. Hopefully you enjoyed it. But with that, I do hope to see you all next time. Later.